Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca. I am the Institute Coordinator for the Harriet Tubman Institute. Thank you all for joining us today for our Tubman Talks with Collette Murray and Karen Murray. So we'll get started and I will pass it off to Salewa.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you again for coming today. I'm just going to quickly start before I introduce our speaker today. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement because we are virtually at York University right now. So York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-lasting relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Home Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Thank you everyone for coming. So today we have a very interesting talk, as you would see, by two wonderful people. The first person is Collette Murray. She presents Upholding Cultural Identities and Student Voice in the Arts, highlights how the cultural arts can design learning spaces, can affirm and center students' intersection identities, and intentionally tackle equity and diversity concepts to address Black students' success through Afro-diasporic art practices. And our second speaker today is Karen Murray, who presents Leading Through a Culturally Relevant Stance, a critical discussion on educational leadership that outlines what qualities constitute a great education leader rooted in the CRP to improve one's leadership ability, disrupt unequal outcomes, and promote anti-oppressive and anti-racist school environments. So they are going to be speaking on culturally relevant pedagogy in action. Please welcome Collette Murray and Karen Murray. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Glad you're here. I'm going to share my screen. I see some familiar faces. I see some colleagues. I see some faculty and respected friends. And we are going to begin very shortly. I'm sharing my screen. Okay. So we're here to talk about culturally relevant pedagogy in action. So it's myself and Karen Murray. We're happy to be here with you this afternoon. So the rhythm that I just played, this is an African indigenous rhythm that stems from the Manding peoples in Guinea. So when Guinea gained its independence from France as a former colony, this was a rhythm, it's called liberté, which means freedom. So this is a music dance practice that speaks to liberation and freedom. I'll turn it over to Karen Murray to give the land an ancestral acknowledgement.
So thank you so much and welcome everyone. And it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon for this conversation. As we think about talking about the Black experience and the affirmation of the African diaspora experience, I always feel it's important that we enter into a space centering an ancestral acknowledgement. So the ancestral acknowledgement that I'm going to read this afternoon comes from Natasha Henry Dixon, who also is a friend, family, and staff there at York University. But she's also an Ontario historian. She's the president of the Ontario Black History Society. She's an educational consultant, and I just wanted to position her words as we enter into our conversation this afternoon. So we acknowledge the Indigenous Africans who were forcibly removed from their native lands and dispersed across the New World. This involuntary migration heavily contributed to the movement of African descendant people across the African diaspora to places like Canada. As students and learners, we deem it highly necessary to think deeper and examine the processes that led to the dispossession of Indigenous people on this land and settler colonialism. Stolen people on stolen land. In entering a conversation about anti-Black racism, and this afternoon by just talking about culturally relevant pedagogy as a vehicle in response to anti-Black racism. It is important that we center the humanity of Black children and Black families, and to examine systems such as the education system to act upon them. So thank you so much, everyone, and it's a pleasure again to be with you, and we're going to engage in a conversation. So next slide. So our learning goals today is timely. It's timely because as leaders in the system, as Black leaders, as those who are working alongside for the betterment of Black students, the need for culturally relevant pedagogy within the educational settings is critical. And we're going to talk about what does that look like, but also position ourselves as we are here at the Harriet Tubman Institute on what does it mean within those who live and holds the identity. We're going to collectively think about centering and uplifting Black students, families, educators, and leaders in educational institutions. And you'll notice we were very intentional. We didn't say schooling only, because sometimes when we say that, people think about K-12 or even K-8 or K-6. We're talking about educational institutions that relate to those even beyond post-high school life and within institutions that we're being hosted in today for this conversation. And we're then going to introduce the implementation of what culturally relevant pedagogy could look like, and through the vehicle of two articles that are part of a larger package of our work. And we want to introduce through the arts when we talk about my best idea of CRP, upholding cultural identities and student voices in the arts. And then I will end with a focus on leading through a culturally relevant stance.
So we want to thank Harriet Tubman Institute for offering their intellectual space. As we are gathered virtually, we appreciate that we're able to focus on the history and the contemporary experience of African peoples and people of African descent that are living in Canada, as well as globally.
So we want to start with Black joy in educational spaces. The work that can't happen unless we center Black joy. And of course, Cleaver Cruz in 2015 coined this term. And I feel like what's important for us to think about when we position Black joy is the idea that Black joy is a term that was often intended as a way of us making space and making space for joy and positive experiences. And when we think about why culturally relevant pedagogy was even created, and we'll talk about that in a minute, it always talked about it being a tool, a vehicle, a framework in order to support the negative experiences of Black children, marginalized children in schooling. So when we position Black joy as an opposition to trauma and tragedy and struggles that are perpetuated by anti-Black racism and oppression and white supremacy, then what we do is that we move the narrative from Black trauma, from tragedy, from constant media depictions of deficit and the conversations of deficit discourse to a place of entering for positive, affirming sense of belonging. And we're hoping today in our conversation, we can position this as we talk about what it could look like as we engage with culturally relevant pedagogy. So I'm gonna start us in a way in which the resource, my best idea, culturally relevant pedagogy ends. And it says this: for too long, Black, Indigenous, and racialized students have sat in classrooms where they did not feel affirmed, did not feel a sense of belonging, and did not see themselves reflected in the school environment. Can you imagine an educational system where the focus is on joy, where Black, Indigenous, and racialized students can demonstrate their brilliance every day, and where all students can not only learn about themselves, but also affirm their intersecting identities as they learn about one another? That is what culturally relevant teaching can achieve. And I hope in our conversation and our talk this afternoon is what we are able to share in the pieces that we will bring forward. So, for those who do not know, what is culturally relevant pedagogy? So I'm going to do Cole's notes here. So that wonderful Shiro you see image on the screen right there is Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. And in 1995, she did some research. And her research was around figuring out why is it that there were schools, specific schools, high percentage of Black and racialized students were doing better than what the expectations and the assumptions of others. Because when you think about academic achievement and you think about what happens in schools, the data tells you the same narrative. But these schools were doing something. They weren't fitting the picture or the image or the stereotype. So she wanted to find out what were those conditions that were happening in those schools that led to such amazing achievement by Black and racialized students, historically marginalized students. And what she found when she did her research, and Dream Keepers is one of her books that, check it out if you don't have it as your go-to. It talked about three things she found. There were high expectations in that school. Not only about academic expectations, but even around behavioral expectations. What is the expectations of our students were above the ceilings? There were cultural confidence taking place. And what that meant was that students' lived reality, their funds of knowledge, who they are, their families, their communities, was part of the living curriculum. And third, she found that they were engaging in critical consciousness. And this is when the ability of students and staff to really think about what are those social political realities happening in the world and how do we bring them in so our students can learn to negotiate, navigate in specific ways in the world. Those three tenets was what was happening in those schools. And we have found in our work, and I'm doing a shout out to my research partner, Dr. Nicole West Burns, who is here with me this afternoon. We have found that these three tenets work. And when we put them together, magic happens. So we're asking you to converse with us on what that looks like in more than one way. Let's keep going, Coco. So I'm introducing the volume 2 of my best idea, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy. And what this resource does is it highlights the classroom tested work of educators who are dedicated to bringing culturally relevant pedagogy to life, those three tenets to life. You'll find an overview of what the tenets are, but there's actionable bottom lines. Here's things that you should consider for next steps as we move forward. And there's ways in which we can describe and define and visualize what it looks like. Next slide.
So now we're going to engage in an implementation. So this is talking about my article in volume, Upholding Cultural Identities and Student Voice in the Arts. So how do I arrive to this conversation? My positionality is that I have lived experience in the Ontario public school system. I am born on Treaty 13 lands. I was born in the Jane and Finch community. And I have gone through the North York Board of Education, the Etobicoke Board of Education, and then the amalgamation of Toronto District School Board. Simultaneously, I have 20 years of performance, teaching, and advocacy in the creative, community arts, and the education sectors. So my artistic work as a programmer, so I have experience there, specifically around my own individual work as a mobile dance education business, but also as an artistic director of an arts collective. My academic background is another intersectional layer where I have social justice and equity studies in my undergraduate degrees and sociology, but also an education degree. So I'm an alumni of York University and also faculty of education, where I enter into this conversation of bringing intersecting arts and education together. So as a Harriet Tubman Institute Fellow, I arrived to this conversation today as I am pursuing my PhD in the Faculty of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design. So I'm part of the Dance Studies department, focusing on dance education. So how I also arrived to this conversation, I have to think about myself as an artist that's entering into educational spaces. And what does that look like? So when I arrive into the space, I am already coming with a multi-sectional layer of understanding what culturally relevant pedagogy is. I'm living it, as opposed to reading about it and then following some instructions. I'm trying to live and embody those three tenets within my work. So thinking about a strategy of what assets can I bring into educational spaces as an artist educator. So again, in terms of one of the tenets, which is high expectations, I'm thinking about when I arrive to an educational space and bring my art, how am I centering the student and how is that art going to be part of the learning outcome versus an opportunity of just entering the school to perform, engage in activity, and exiting. So thinking intentionally. My work is really surrounded around what are the positive contributions of African, Caribbean, and Black peoples? What are the multiple ways of knowing? So I'm coming with knowledge systems that are coming from these artistic knowledge systems that are coming across the diaspora, because my work is to amplify those art practices that have historically been devalued. So when it comes to cultural competence, the second tenet, I arrive as an arts educator by not only looking at and understanding the conversation, the intersections with race, but also with ethnicity and indigeneity. Because the African diaspora has multiple ethnicities and multiple cultures and languages, it's important that I am centering non-Western knowledge systems in the form of arts, and also really expanding this social construction of what it means to be Black, so that it encompasses all of these peoples, these ethnicities, these cultures, these communities. And also in terms of, I arrive to an educational space as an educator, as someone who has had lived experience where there has been educators who have underestimated my ability to have knowledge in the space, meaning they had low expectations of me. Primary, middle, high school. I've had these experiences as a student in the public school education. So I understand that notion of having a lack of student voice. When it comes to how I arrive with a culture of the critical consciousness as an arts educator, I'm arriving with, how do I critically solve this particular question that you see on the screen? How am I going to uphold the racialized student identity and voices in the classrooms that I'm entering in? So again, how I do this is because I will have to have an understanding of the research. So Karen spoke about Dr. Latson-Billings researching about how specific schools were excelling. The research that I've encountered in my education were mostly about the stereotypes, the deficit labeling, the discipline of Black students placed in special ed, the achievement caps. Those are the things that I've read in my studies about that dominant narrative of education being given to them and the marginalization that students would feel. So understanding achievement gaps, as well as trying to understand the localized data of the schools that I'm entering into as an artist, that is a base for my foundation. So I have to have a foundation of how's power operating in the room, what are the dynamics, because I am an external member of the community entering into the school. So I have to respond ethically in how I enter that space as well, and how I arrive into the space. As well, how I solve this problem using critical consciousness is, how do I conceptualize a way to solve the problem? So I use a collaborative design. So because I'm living through culturally relevant pedagogy in my work, I thought about how can I conceptualize a collaborative way as an artist to enter into a school space and bring a culturally relevant design within arts models. So what methodology am I going to approach this with? So when the next slide is about cultural arts. So how I arrived to do that is through cultural arts. Within my graduate research, I talk about cultural arts and how I define this is African diasporic arts practices that are integrated. So that would be the oral, the visual, the kinesthetic, the auditory. So this integrated art practice has social significance, it has meaning, and it has intergenerational values. And the history will be contextualized, the contemporary experience will be contextualized, and I'll also give credit to the origin and the community where this information and the arts practice comes from. So I use this concept within my work. So because I'm arriving as an artist with a different entry point to the students that I engage in, we're not on the same equal playing field. So as there has been historical learning methods that have been culturally alienating, my approach is to bring a teaching method that doesn't separate the culture from the art, but it prioritizes the purpose, the structure, the functions that reflect the community's knowledge and their experiences. And this is page 37 from the article. So now I will talk about the case study where I implemented culturally relevant pedagogy. So within the article, in 2018, a discussion occurred between myself and the senior administration of Amesbury Middle School, which is located in the Black Creek and Lawrence area, not too far from our Keele, York campus. So this was a case where the conversation, in order to have that foundation that I've been speaking of, the research, we had to engage in some local focus groups. So canvassing the students to understand, for me, what were the student demographics of the school. Also to understand where they were at in terms of their sense of belonging in the school, their relationship to the school. So from that data, it was determined that the students felt a sense, like a lack of sense of belonging in their school environments. And they requested a need to learn more about their culture. So that conversation meant that we as educators, so the school, as well as myself as an external artist educator coming in, had to be intentional about how we're going to respond to the students' needs. They're voicing a particular concern. So that led to a 3-month initiative. So what we did was have this co-collaborative design of a project that was funded by the Ministry of Education to support racialized students. The school demographic is, I believe it was about 90% racialized, and the largest number of students happened to be African or identify as African, Caribbean, and Black in the school. So the conversation was around a 3-month initiative where the staff, the teachers, and the students would go through mini workshops to discuss anti-racism, anti-Black racism, and anti-oppression concepts, grapple those concepts, have conversations. And then the second phase was the student was going to choose the artistic medium that my artistic collective, Coco Collective, was going to offer. So these artistic mediums were basically rooted in artistic practices that generations and specific ethnic groups and communities, this was the artistic response to oppressive situations. So creatively, how are the students going to tackle and use their critical conscious skills to be active agents to engage and interrogate those concepts that they learned by using the arts? So by incorporating that feedback and having their artistic modules to actually engage in CRP in action, we're bringing in cultural references and content that were relevant to the students. They were learning about different facets of the African and Caribbean diaspora. They have cultural references to refer to. They are learning information about things they did not were not aware of as well. So I'm going to pause here because I'm going to be showing a video. Okay, so that was a demonstration of the actual project, but I wanted to bring attention to something I centralized in the article, which is about the role of the artist educator in the CRP process. We are bringing an arts-based inquiry into the classroom, but we're also shifting power and orientation of that classroom. Our art has to arrive with purpose and alignment with the learning outcomes. And within the cultural arts work, we're intentionally centering African, Caribbean, and Black student identities, so they see a representation of themselves. And the artist is arriving as a knowledge holder, sharing knowledge systems and knowledge productions that historically have been marginalized. But you're also arriving with artistic leadership in order to conceptualize a curriculum design and incorporate a pedagogical approach, such as CRP, that's using relevant artistic practices of Afro descendants, so that not only the school administration, but the educators who were listening and observing and noting the students' progress in this project, that art is a valued skill. It conveys techniques and cultural practices. And that art is beyond a peripheral activity, but it's an intellectual, political, socio-emotional, and kinesthetic tool that can be used to translate learning outcomes. So the findings that I found from this 3-month initiative, which was an intentional co-design with the education leadership, the spoken word, the visual arts, the West African djembe dance, the percussion. These were vehicles to provide the students opportunities for them to engage in a critical discourse about identities, their own identities, and also have intercultural learning about different ethnicities, understand their diasporic histories as racialized students, but as well as identify the skills and competencies that they have were acquired to become agents of change. So that video has been shared amongst the board to show intentional programming and how there is ways to respond to Black student achievement outcomes. So this project led to a 6-month initiative that I designed with Coco Collective and bringing in other artists to lead a 6-month initiative that I got funding from the Toronto Arts Council and Ontario Arts Council as well. So that led to another group of students who participated with us for a 6-month duration called Amesbury Cultural Experience. And what we noticed with that is in their culminating showcase, we intentionally made sure that in front of the principal, in front of their families, their parents, their teachers who attended, and their peers, each student individually or collectively was recognized for their strengths, their progress in the program, and how they were willing to amplify their voices in the process. So I just want to show a minute of that project. So we can pause the recording. So in conclusion, in this implementation of culturally relevant pedagogy, I wanted to intentionally show that classroom educators can collaborate with arts educators, skilled arts educators, so that we can bring an value added to the classroom and actually engage in these expressions of Black joy, so that the students can be fully immersed in allowing themselves to be self-actualized, also to form a sense of community, and as a response to the systems that have devalued them and stifled their self-expression. So I say that educational settings can give space to center joy, but also transfer the knowledge production of Afro descendants. Thank you.
Ready.
Thank you, Coco. How am I going to follow that without any video and all that cool stuff? But we'll see how we go. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm positioning myself as my 6-year-old self. So that is me. And my picture, I was probably in, I don't even think I was grade 1. Maybe I was in kindergarten. But who am I? I'm an educational leader that is committed to Black student success. But who I am is the same person you see there in my 5-6-year-old self. Same personality, same way of engaging, same core. So as an adult, I've engaged in community. I'm a community advocate. I believe in paying it forward. So when the elders speak to me and they give me a blessing and a lesson, I take that and give to somebody else. And I say to that person, no thanks needed. Just pay it forward so that generations can build on that learning. I'm a feminist. I'm a Black feminist. I'm proud of it. But I'm also a proud alumni of York University. I tell people I was there with urban diversity in the Faculty of Ed, close to the inception. My mentor was Dr. Patrick Solomon, who created that program. And my other mentor was Henderson Hope. And Hendy made the program come alive for me. What else am I proud of? I'm proud of the Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement, TDSB's Center. We just launched a year ago. We virtually launched two years ago. But what makes this special? We're the first of its kind that's public funded in North America. And when I say that with pride, because the work that we do, the focus on being relevant and responsive, comes to make these amazing opportunities exist. So I'm entering this conversation of leadership, how Coco ended hers, which centers joy, but centered students. And I'm asking you to go on this journey with me in my conversation about leadership, thinking about how leaders could be students too. Let's go. So what do we know? Leadership ranges from the following. So I gave you one already. That's not here. I gave you the leadership of the student. But we have to dismantle this idea of leadership. Who is a leader? So we know leaders could be new teachers entering the profession, and they're committed to making change for the betterment of their students. We know leaders could be aspiring. They're still classroom teachers, but they're doing a lot of amazing things. They could be school administrators or managers who are passionate about setting conditions within their sphere of influence that can remove barriers that create unequal outcomes. Leaders could be system leaders like myself. We hold a title, we sit on certain tables, we sit in certain places. And we try our best within our sphere of influence to remove barriers and make decisions that can transform educational experiences for many. So in the article, when I'm talking about leading through a cultural relevant stance, who are our leaders? Our leaders are all these people and families, students, community as well. Let's keep going. So what do we know? We know that when you are a Black leader and hold that identity, sometimes, many times, oftentimes, engaging in making change comes with pushback, explanations. It's not easy. So one of the things we know that when we talk to Black leaders in any form of leadership, so I'm going to talk to formal leadership spaces at this moment, administrators, principal, vice principals, system leaders, etc. They're often questioned, why Black? Why are you focusing on Black student success? What about everybody else? Aren't we supposed to be equal? Often, they want you to own the anti-Black racism work. Yeah, that's your thing. It's not mine, it's yours. You're trying to indoctrinate us. You need to carry the lift, that heavy lift of dismantling something that systems and structures and society and colonization and ideologies has created. Sometimes you're the expert. So you have to carry the burden of knowing everything about the Black African identities with an S, because we're not monolithic. So you now have to be responsible for being an expert in various ways in which the Black identity expresses itself. Sometimes we have to unlearn colonization to relearn what the impact of colonization has been. Because remember, we were raised in a colonized space. And so sometimes, even though we're in the body, we sometimes have to unlearn certain narratives that have been fed to us, like smog. Sometimes in doing this work, within the body that I hold, you have to confront authority. You might have to push about making the work happen in your space. You have to hold space to say, no, anti-Black racism is operating here. And sometimes when you push too hard, you have to be thinking is, am I gonna face reprisal for this? What I'm committed to, that I know is true, which we know anti-Black racism is normalized and invisible in our present. It just becomes a status quo. So it's important that I center this here as we talk about what leaders can do. Because it's important to recognize that what we're going to talk about in terms of culturally relevant leadership, I want to add identity, positionality, knowing who you are, what you engage in is going to be equally important, and they go hand in hand. Okay, next. So what do we know? We know that educational leadership requires a foundation, and Coco talked about a foundation in hers and how she enters through that way. And the foundation is culturally relevant pedagogy. And why do we need that foundation? Because we have to counter those ongoing deficit narratives and issues of oppression and discrimination that Black, Indigenous, and other racialized learners experience in schools and other learning environments. So we know that. What else do we know? Culturally relevant leaders need to facilitate and support the achievement of all students, but they need to be aware that all students doesn't mean everyone is receiving equal treatment. We could talk about streaming. We could talk about special education. So what do they need to know? Yes, we believe that we want all students to achieve, but we have a keen eye on how to disrupt those unequal educational experiences that are happening day to day for many students, Black students, Indigenous students, right? They're also committed to building that third tenet, which is that critical consciousness, that social political awareness, the understanding of issues of racism and hate. And they need to build them for themselves, for their staff, and within their students, right? And what we know is that this idea of critical consciousness is grounded in the belief that we are there to create transformational change. So if we're committed in creating change, so that classrooms and schooling and experiences in school-ins can be better for students who are often receiving negative experiences in schools, then we need to make sure that we become partners in their learning and with others. And what Coco described in her case study is when community educators come in as co-partners, co-designers in creating spaces where students can speak to their experiences through the arts and through something that brings joy. Next slide. So what does this mean? It means we have to be rooted in understanding that oppression exists and it creates barriers. And I don't have to go deep into that because we all know that. We know streaming exists. We know when we talk about school discipline and who gets found in the office often, et cetera, et cetera. I shared this already. What do we know? That those barriers, those systemic barriers that has become status quo, often become so normalized and deeply woven into the fabric of schools that it's just everyday experiences. And we have to disrupt that. And that's what leading through this stance allows. So what are we suggesting? We're suggesting that there has to be a new type of educational leader so that intentional or unintentional ways of engaging, we critique it because we don't want to become complicit in reproducing oppression every single day. Let's go to the next one. So, you are a leader that is, so as we move through leading through culturally relevant stance, you're open and accountable to the expectations of students, their families, communities, staff, and the larger educational community. You are aware that transforming educational spaces can only occur by intentionally implementing those tenets that we talked about: high expectations, cultural competence, and critical consciousness. And you are a leader that is mindful that culture is broadly defined and is complex. Culture is not an easy thing. And we need to think about, what do I know about culture and how do I define it? Next slide. So, if you're leading through a culturally relevant stance, you are a leader that can do certain things. One, you're going to put into practice those 3 core tenets of CRP, which are high expectations, cultural competence, critical consciousness. You're going to engage in constant critical self-reflection because you need to examine all the time who you are. Who are you? What are you coming with? What are your biases? What are your assumptions? What are those privileges and stereotypes and prejudices that are there that you need to unpack? And as I said, unlearn to relearn, right? And how these things, those assumptions and those biases and your unlearning of them and your relearning, how does all those factors have significant implications in regards to your ongoing work with others? So who I am impacts what I do, my practice, my pedagogy. And without really taking a moment to critique and examine, why am I doing what I'm doing? And how is what I'm doing actually making change? And how are you actually making a difference on behalf of the lives of others? Next slide, please. So when we think about leading through a certain stance, and you're thinking about this idea of, how do I do this as a Black leader? I told you all the things that can happen, right? It's your thing, you're trying to, convince others. You need to build alliances. Now, do I believe you need to build alliances with everybody who engages in this work? Absolutely. But I want you to understand that in order to continue to build your resolve, to do this heavy lifting, to do this heavy work, you need to have those in which you can connect with. So you cannot do this work in isolation, especially when juxtaposed against the system you seek to take on. So imagine that. We're fighting against a system that things are normalized, and at the same time, you're trying to do that heavy lifting. You can't do it by yourself. You need to do it in concert with others. Next slide. So I'm going to begin with the quote. And basically it says, understanding oneself, one's role and position within the institution suggests a different way of being, engaging with and amongst each other. That comes from years and years and years of experience in the field. So what does that mean? You need to have a knowledge of yourself. You have to have awareness of your identity. And I know we change and morph and grow, but you need to have a core understanding of, what is my philosophy? What is driving me? Why am I committed to this? You need to create counter spaces. And what do I mean by counter spaces? You need to create those spaces where it's different. So those affinity spaces, those alliances that I'm thinking about, you need to push against that. And you need to enter into those spaces that is uniquely with the people who you know you can lean on, who you can engage with. You have to engage in counter narratives. You know what I mean? You're going to have conversations that push against what everybody else is talking. Really digging deep about, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Education looks like this, but I know an Afrocentric education looks like this. I know when I engage in culturally relevant pedagogy, it looks and feels like this. We need to engage in mentorship with each other. How do we mentor? How do we model? And most importantly, because this work is so heavy, we have to engage in self-care. Okay. So, as I close, and we get into our conversation, I want to take a moment to say thank you to my co-editors. That's Jennifer Watt, and that's Alice Tay. They were with me for this ride of creating this beautiful purple book, My Best Idea, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy. But I also, and I know we have one or two members here on our with us this afternoon, and I want to do a shout out to Terry and the Rubicon team, who really listen as we try to bring joy and center joy as a way of an educational experience for those in the province. Coco?
Okay, thank you so much. This concludes our presentation.
Now we get to, people could come off mic and we can have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Collette and Karen. What a wonderful presentation. I loved it. So anyone who has any questions or comments, please feel free to just unmute yourself, or if you feel more comfortable typing it in the chat. We also have a Q&A function here. Yeah, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Coco, can we take down the stop share so I can see folk?
Okay.
No shyness, please. We altered our presentation so we could have time to talk. We really did, because me and Coco could keep going for a while. So anyone very interested in hearing any conversation.
May I ask?
Yes, please go ahead.
So nice to see you and nice to be with everyone this afternoon. Coco, I actually wanted to ask you about, you were talking about bringing community in, working very intentionally, the work you did with Amesbury and with the teachers. And one of the things that I've seen happen in some of the work Karen and I have done together, some of the work I've done as well, is that those things are really, really effective. I mean, all of that you showed was so rich, and I can't wait to read your article. And wondering, I know there was a follow-up as well. So wondering a little bit about, because you transformed what was going on in those spaces for the time you were there and for your follow-up. Has there been any conversation of what happens after, or what happened after? Because that's one of the pieces where we know when we're there doing that work very intentionally. So I'm just curious how, if you know of any ways in which the teachers have taken that on themselves or tried to expand from the kind of pedagogical practices you were engaging in. Thank you.
From what I understood, thank you for the question, because the impact as an artist, of course, whenever we get grant funding, we always have to talk about impact and write reports. But for me, I would say the conversations and the feedback from the teachers to the senior administration, that was most impactful, where the students they formed closer bonds, their confidence had increased. They were more engaged in their learning throughout the academic year and the following year. I found that it was difficult to get back into the school because, of course, the pandemic happened. And then there was some changes with teachers, or maybe some of the leadership had shifted and changed. So that impacted it, because we wanted to come back again and to offer another session of that 6-month period program with a new group of students. So the pandemic impacted that. Because our engagement is so interactive, you can't do that virtually.
Right.
You cannot do cultural arts. You can't do the percussion, the dance movement, the visual art. All of that is tangible and it's relational. So that's why I couldn't convert to a virtual offering. Which everyone was forcing us to do because of the circumstance. So the impact, again, it was grand, it was great. We had a champion educator, she gave rave reviews, the educators told us a lot of information. It was just, how do we come back in and continue the work so that we can affect another generation of students, those who exit, those who come in, and create a community initiative. So those things are things I have to think about.
Thank you.
Ife, you're muted.
Of course I am. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I learned quite a lot. I thoroughly enjoyed that. There was just so much to take from there, and I was taking down notes because this idea of a culturally relevant pedagogy is so fascinating to me. And I don't have a question. I'm just going to talk because I don't have a question. I don't have a question. I just have so much that I'm thinking about. So I'll try and be as coherent as possible. So I guess I have a question. I was just thinking through how that's possible. Like in my own work, I was thinking more specifically how one could include culturally relevant pedagogy in one's teaching. So that's still something that I'm thinking about. The second thing that I was thinking about is during your presentation, and I think it was at the beginning portion of Karen's presentation when she was talking about there was this teacher, I think, that was doing some research and found that there were some racialized students that were doing so much better in some schools, and they were meeting all their milestones, they were achieving great success academically, and trying to figure out why that was the case. And I was sitting here thinking the same thing, right? And I was thinking about me as a little TA in my class. I'm thinking about all the international students that I see every year and all the difficulties that they have, writing English, and English is not their first language, and all the struggles that they have trying to connect with these readings. And for some of them, it's completely out of context. The things that we take for granted, we're sitting there and we know some of these names, or we know we were lucky to be educated, for example, in North America for some people, and there are many things that we just take for granted. They're just known, right? And you're sitting in a classroom and there are people that have never heard these names, or they've never heard of these concepts, not because they don't have a proper education, right? But they're coming from a different location, they're coming from a different country, and maybe they learned of these concepts, but in a different language, in a different context. So I was just listening to your presentation and thinking about all of that while thinking about how to introduce this idea of a culturally relevant pedagogy in my own teaching and what that could look like, right? How that could benefit everyone. I also thought about this idea of joy in education. I'm like, no, I've never thought of education as being site of joy. I've always thought of education as being rigid and stuffy and clinical. And I'm like, wow, what does that look like? Right? I like, what does that look like? That would have been so amazing for me if I went to school and felt joy. I never went to school feeling joy. I went to school as the opposite. Right. So these are all the things that I was thinking about. And then also thinking about how learning happens for some of us that were educated in Africa. I was educated in Africa, and how there's lots of storytelling and there's lots of proverbs in the classroom, right? Like, you're just, your professor's trying to explain something and then he pauses and starts singing, right? And the song makes perfect sense, and everybody kind of knows what, understands the meaning through the song, or understands the meaning through this proverb, right? And how that's just completely out of context in this environment, like it would be in trouble, right? And stuff like, but so there's just so much to think about, right? And then I was thinking about Ubuntu as well, and how, how can you include this concept of Ubuntu in the classroom where it's like a community? What does that look like in real time? And I think that's still what I'm thinking about, like, how do I incorporate all of this? Like, how do I leave this presentation with all this information and all this knowledge that I have, and find clever ways of introducing it in the classroom, right? In a way that could really, truly be beneficial to everyone, right? Create your own unique way of teaching, whereby people feel as though they're not just getting, they're getting so much more than an education, right? And they're filled with joy being in the classroom. Like it's a pleasant experience learning. And okay, I'm rambling. So those are all the things that I'm thinking about because of your presentation. So thank you so much. Just so much to think about. Thank you.
I wouldn't mind entering to say, before I think about history, and I think about one-room classrooms, And I think about the times in history when it was Black students all together in a classroom with a Black educator. And I think about the moments of intellectual greatness that came from those spaces, and the affirmation and the positive identity development that was there, that allows some of our greatest heroes and sheroes to land in so many places in this world. Like when we think about it, right? W.E.B. Du Bois and et cetera, et cetera. So I think about that, and I think about joy, and I think about the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And that national anthem, over 100 years old now, but it was sung every single day in a one-room schoolhouse, from schoolhouse to schoolhouse to schoolhouse, by young Black children, because that song brought them joy. And so I think for us, that's the push we have to get. What makes kids smile? What makes them want to come every single day? What is that thing that is the hook? Like, you know, I'm so sick, I don't want to go to school, and the mom's like, or the dad's like, no, it's okay, you can stay home. And they're like, not me. I got to get there because I don't want to miss something. That's the joy we're talking about. That's the feeling we want students to have, that I can't miss it. You know, not, oh my goodness, I'm not feeling well, and tomorrow I'm not feeling well. I'm going to tell you, but next week I ain't going to feel well because I don't want to go. You know what I mean? So that's what made you, as you were talking, those are the things that came to my mind, and why it is that it's important to center the joy, but center kids coming from the place of their knowledge, their family knowledge, and bringing that and making the bridge to what we're teaching in the classroom. And that's all culturally relevant pedagogy really is in simplest form. Jason, thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. And yes, fabulous presentation, Karen. You know, always you have your mic drop moment, wisdom that you're dropping. But I gotta say, and no offense to you, Karen, I was really excited to hear Collette today because I hear
it's
you.
All right, you see me all the time. It's good to hear Coco and her work.
Absolutely. And I've heard Karen talk of you, so it was nice to see you in your own voice today, Collette. So very nice
I appreciate
to see the great things that you're doing. Wondering, and it's actually something Karen and I were just talking about this afternoon in some of the work that we're doing with educators. And for those of you working directly with educators, I kind of put this out to the whole group. It's really easy for educators as they're building their cultural competence when we're working through untold stories to get focused on the harm and the oppression in those stories and forget about the joy and brilliance and resistance and resilience and survivance and thriving, right? What are ways that we can ensure educators, as we build their cultural competence, don't lose sight of that joy in those untold stories?
We'll open that up. We have so many brilliant minds here, and this is supposed to be a conversation. So anyone wants to enter and start us off, and then we'll continue. How do we get?
I can start by saying, because I'm coming now from the dance studies discipline, even though there are some barriers, I have to intentionally try to bring in other resources and other content into my graduate study classroom. And that's what I've done when I took my courses, so that people can see those positive contributions, that joy. So it's not stories that are just centered around trauma and resisting oppression. It's what do we do, how do we do it, and how we are authentically discussing these engagements in an intellectual way in dance studies. So these are things that I have to do in my research and my conference presentations. So sometimes the work does fall back on me to do that extra lifting because the curriculum content doesn't have it there. So that's how I would enter that conversation.
Anyone else about how we build knowledge? Yes, go ahead. Kelly?
I want to add to what Collette was saying, because I was in Colette's class for the PhD dissertation proposal. And so I just want to congratulate you so much, Collette, for all the work that you've been doing. And her work is her dissertation will surely be in addition to all of that knowledge, for Canadian dance history and all of that, and the biographies and the stories of people and their stories of resilience and coming up with confrontation and how do you what have they done? And those stories end up inspiring other people like, oh, that's how they figured it out then. And somehow it's able to resonate with the present moment of like, there's challenges today. How do I encounter those challenges? And when you hear other stories and other lived lives, it helps bring inspiration for your own progress as a, entrepreneur, artist.
Thank you, Kelly. Anyone else?
Ife and Kelly, we've taken classes together.
Ah. Anyone else as we think about this whole idea of untold stories being told, but people come with the untold stories, but the story they're telling is a definite story. They're not going to find the story, even in the middle of the oppression that brings some sort of affirmation and joy.
Yeah, this is a real world issue that we're grappling with right now. So the wisdom of this group is deeply appreciated. I'm taking notes.
I'll tell you what I said, and then someone else can add as well. While Jason and myself was talking, I talked about that sometimes people get caught up in the injustice. So they know they want to tell a story, an untold. So for example, the example that I had modeled was Africville. So you understand this, Nicole, right? So we talk about Africville, we talk about the people, we talk about the strength of the people, we talked about the carvers and the generation and all of this, and the injustice of it all, that they go into a Black community and try to remove the whole community, et cetera, et cetera. But even though the narrative was the relocation, the untold story was about the strength of the people and the feelings of the people. So when we now have seen the take up of how some people have seen that modeling, what we notice as I would say a trend, if I could say that, Jason, is that they spent more time in the narrative of the injustice than in the finding that enduring understanding of why you brought the story forward in the first place. Does that make sense, everyone? How I'm describing that? So what we're saying is, how do you get people to, even if I want to talk about enslavement, even if I want to talk about Uncle Tom's Cabin, let's say that. And we know Uncle Tom's Cabin was a haven in which those who came up from the Underground Railroad could go to in a certain place in Western Ontario, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of talking about the enduring understanding of Uncle Tom's Cabin and what it means and what it could have done, a lot of it was placed on the fact that they were enslaved people and the narrative of enslavement. That's another example I can give. So that's why Jason is asking this question, like, what do you do when you want people to talk untold stories? You want them to talk counter narratives. You want them to engage in a different way, but the injustice seems to be the thing that just kind of holds them.
Any other comments?
Hi, I'm Debbie, and I hate speaking on Zoom, but I'm just loving that this whole conversation and the presentations. Thank you very much, Karen and Collette. And I think what Colette's doing is really where we need to go. I think movement is so important to bring joy and untold stories. Those stories, there's the stories that you tell to the public, you tell to yourself as well. And so I'll give an example. I'm Afro-Chinese from Jamaica. And I went to school in Kitchener in the 80s. There was no Black person. There was one other Asian person in the whole high school. And I only had white teachers, but and I remember this so clearly. We did Jamaican folk dances and songs, which I didn't know. I didn't grow up with them. I might have heard them on records, but I didn't know there were actual dances to them. And in terms of the impact that we were talking about earlier, like those songs have stayed with me throughout my life. You know, like I would start searching for those songs. I sang them to my children. I'm now doing research on folk dances as well and movement as archives. And when I saw the children in the video that you showed, Collette, or the young students, they had joy. I mean, you need to move your body, I think, to experience this depth of joy. So I think that's one really key thing, is because kids are made to sit still. You know, they're on their devices, they're at their seats. And there's this connection between the body and the mind that I think they have less and less of as we use more technology and we're trying to feed kids more information. But there's so many different ways of knowing and of experiencing knowledge, and giving the students opportunities to find that knowledge. So I was able to teach a class called Politics of the Archives last semester. And one of the other things I think that can be done is this polyvocal way of teaching, and I get this from Ronaldo Walcott, like bringing guest speakers. People do this all the time, but I had an indigenous filmmakers, like having people with real lived experience speaking, because I know in so many different cultures, humor is a way of dealing with trauma, and humor is also a way to express joy. So, and to see that existing simultaneously within a person telling a story, I think was really new for the students. So yeah, those are just some of the things I wanted to offer to the conversation, but I'm loving it.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I think we can have one last conversation comment, and then Collette, you're going to say our goodbyes and wish people a wonderful holiday weekend, Easter weekend. So anyone, any last pearly gem on this topic?
Hi,
Yes,
everyone.
Wendy.
Oh, thank you. The one piece that jumped out to me, besides the beauty of the work that you've done, Collette and Karen, you know, when you were talking about students as co-conspirators and student leadership, and to me that is, you know, I really do think it's an untapped place in our systems, and so, you know, to really, like, we ask student voice all the time, but how authentically are we using it? How are we actually implementing change and system change? And so I guess I'm wondering, you know, what are some thoughts of this group here on how do we authentically use student voice so that it does make a shift in the systems, policies, practices, structures within our you know, various spheres of influence, if you will. And that's probably bigger than a 2-minute question.
Yes, I know it is. You came in right under the wire. But here's what I'm gonna say, and then Coco, I'll let you continue. I think your question beautifully merges the other question. And so what it is this: if we want to tell untold stories, and we want to tell those stories from a place of joy, then we have to center students to understand those stories so they can see the joy within the story. When they tell the story, and it's very interesting, when young people tell a story, they may talk about the injustice, but they always quickly enter from a place of fair, not fair, what should we do? Like they're moving straight to a place of challenge and change, you know? And so I think what we need to think about is, how are we using student voice in a way that we're just not asking them to be responsive to what we want to hear, but how are we asking them to be critical in the part of engaging in the co-teaching and the co-facilitating of the conversation that we want to kind of move forward with. So I think that would be my answers. Coco?
In the university context, what I've seen at the graduate level, and it depends on the scholar who's teaching the course. It depends if they have a set curriculum that they're teaching of the field, but then they might want to do like a co-design of the second part of the syllabi and ask students to bring in sources and open up the discussion. I've seen that occur. So the student feels involved in crafting that curriculum for their student engagement for that course. If they're presenting, you can bring in other materials. That's a way that I just took up space. That's just what I did, because what I wanted to bring into the room wasn't there in the curriculum. But what I find with, if a scholar is asking for the student to be involved in the process of, oh, you can bring in other resources and other relevant, you may think it's extra work, but it's an opportunity for you to also center your knowledge on a subject and expose the class and even the educator, the scholar, to a different conversation. So that's another thing that can happen as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to do my thank yous, and then Coco, if you could do your thank yous. But again, I would like to say a thank you to the Harriet Tubman Institute for having us bring our thinking and voice to a conversation today. Totally appreciate it. Love the narrative, and you know, it's always an honor. And I would like to say to all those who took their time this afternoon to come join us in this conversation, totally appreciate you all, and wishing you all a good weekend for some rest, relaxation, some family, some joy, because joy is in family as well. So I just want to say those thank yous, sending it over to you, Coco, to close us out.
I want to thank everyone for joining us in this conversation. Hopefully it could be one of many. I would also note that this is a timely conversation given York University's positionality in setting up a decolonization strategy, as well as the framework for Black inclusion, as well as the Indigenous framework that they're trying to implement into the infrastructure of the university. So having these conversations about the knowledge systems coming from Black scholars is very important. And hence why I wanted to have this conversation, because again, this is a new resource they weren't aware of. So it's just to promote that these articles and these discussions are happening, and that we can tell other colleagues, other educational leaders to check out the resource and see if there are some gems that could help enhance our decolonization goals here at York. So thank you for coming.
Exactly. And so please enjoy my big idea, my best idea, volume 2, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy. And, you know, on the front of the book, it says, educators see ideas that change their classrooms. And let's hope you can find some gems in there that can change your lives as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Collette, so much for joining us on behalf of the Harriet Tubman Institute. We truly appreciate your presence and appreciate the conversation that you've both fostered today. And yeah, I'm excited to learn more and follow up and read about and read your articles in the publication. So thank you and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.